Michael Phelps, the champion's DNA. Every generation, sports gives us figures who transcend competition. Athletes who don't just break records, they shatter the limits of what we believe is possible for a human being. And among them all, one name echoes like a legend that seems molded by water itself. Michael Phelps. The boy who was born with trouble focusing, who seemed destined for failure, found in swimming pools not just refuge, but his calling. An ordinary kid, with flaws, with fears, who dared to transform his limitations into superpowers. And so, before the world's eyes, a young man with determined gaze began rewriting Olympic history. With every stroke, he wasn't just moving through water, he was swimming toward eternity. Phelps isn't just an athlete. He's a symbol of discipline, of obsession with excellence, of resilience in the face of the hardest falls. He's proof that a champion's DNA isn't measured just by medals, but by the ability to rise when everything seems lost. Today, we're diving deep into the journey of a man who carried the weight of an entire planet's expectations and still managed to swim above the waves of doubt. Michael Phelps's story isn't about swimming. It's about courage, overcoming obstacles, and the human spirit in its purest form. This is Champion's DNA, the place where the greatest stories of all time become eternal. If you believe every champion is born human but chooses to be eternal, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and join us on this epic journey. Childhood and challenges. Baltimore, Maryland, late 1980s. In the middle of an ordinary American family's daily life, a boy was born who seemed to have nothing extraordinary about him. On the contrary, Michael Fred Phelps was a restless, hyperactive kid with endless energy and trouble concentrating. Early on came the diagnosis: ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. At school, teachers said he'd never go far. It was hard for him to sit still in a chair, hard to focus on a task. Many saw him as the problem child. The words sounded like sentences. He'll never have discipline, never be able to follow a path. But destiny tends to write different stories for those who dare to find strength in their own weaknesses. It was his mother, Debbie Phelps, who realized her son needed an outlet, a space where his energy could be channeled. And that space wasn't in a classroom, but in the water. Michael entered the pool as a child, and something changed. There where the world became silence, where every stroke was a straight line toward infinity, he found peace. In the water, his restless mind transformed into absolute focus. The boy who couldn't sit still discovered he could swim for hours without getting tired. What was seen as a defect became an advantage. Infinite energy, intense dedication, and an almost supernatural relationship with water. At just 11 years old, Michael began training with Bob Bowman, the coach who would shape his career. Bowman saw something in the boy that few could see: raw, almost wild potential that could be polished to perfection. But for that, discipline, sacrifice, and an unshakable faith in the journey would be necessary. And so began the transformation from ordinary boy into something greater. The pool wasn't just a training ground, it was the stage where he reinvented himself. Every lap, every dive was more than technique. It was building a mindset, a champion's mindset. At Champions DNA, we believe the greatest champions aren't born ready. They're born human, full of flaws and doubts. But it's exactly these flaws that, when channeled with courage, become the flame that lights the path to greatness. What about you? Have you ever thought about how your weaknesses can transform into strengths? Drop it in the comments, because that's the first great lesson from Michael Phelps's journey.
First steps to glory. Year 2000, the world was preparing for the new millennium, and in Sydney, Australia, the Olympics were the stage where the planet's greatest athletes competed for eternal gold. Among so many giants of sport, one 15-year-old teenager caught attention: Michael Phelps, the youngest American swimmer to compete in an Olympics in almost 7 decades. He didn't win a medal at that Olympics, but in that moment, it didn't matter. Simply being there was already a sign of what was to come. While the world's eyes turned to already established legends, there was something different about that kid. A presence, a cold, almost impenetrable look that hid unlimited ambition within. The boy who was once doubted was now swimming among men. And even without reaching the podium, he made it clear he wasn't there to participate, but to dominate. In the following years, Phelps would transform into a record-breaking machine. At 15, he broke his first world record in the 200-meter butterfly, the event that would later become his sacred territory. It was just the beginning of a streak that would change swimming forever. And it wasn't just natural talent. There was an almost military routine behind his meteoric rise. While other kids his age were at parties, playing video games, or sleeping in, Phelps woke up before sunrise. He trained 5 to 6 hours a day, swam more than 50 miles per week, spent up to 365 days a year in the pool. Yes, even on Christmas, even on his birthday, even when he didn't want to. Michael Phelps wasn't just a promising young athlete. He was forging himself as an aquatic warrior, molding body and mind to withstand the pressure of an entire planet. And Bob Bowman, his coach, knew the kid had something no one possessed. In 2004, just 4 years after Sydney, the world would see this kid transform into an Olympic phenomenon. But even before Athens, it was already clear Champions DNA flowed through Michael Phelps's veins. Would you have the courage to sacrifice so much for a dream? Leave your thoughts in the comments, because Phelps's journey is just getting started. The rise and peak at Athens 2004. Athens 2004, the birthplace of the Olympic Games, welcomed the world once again. The stage couldn't have been more symbolic. The city where the ideals of competition, honor, and glory were born. And it was there that Michael Phelps, then just 19 years old, transformed from promising youngster to global star. The entire world was watching. The press spoke of him as the new Mark Spitz, the swimming legend who had won 7 golds in Munich, 1972. It was a heavy burden for anyone, but Phelps wasn't anyone. In those Greek waters, Michael competed in 8 events, 8 battles against the planet's best swimmers. The result: 6 gold medals and 2 bronze. An impressive feat that immediately placed him among the greatest names in Olympic history. Each victory seemed to announce something greater. The elongated body, the massive wingspan, feet that looked like flippers, almost superhuman endurance. Everything about Phelps seemed molded for water. But there was something beyond genetics. What set him apart wasn't just in his physique, but in his mind. His concentration was unshakable. Before each race, he put on his headphones, closed his eyes, and dove into his own world. There, inside his mind, he had already swum that race hundreds of times. Every turn, every stroke, every breath. The execution was almost perfect, because for him, it was no longer new. It was destiny. But Athens' glory was just the beginning, because even with 6 golds, Phelps wasn't satisfied. The world applauded him, but he saw something greater, something no one had the courage to imagine. He wanted more than being compared to Spitz. He wanted to surpass the impossible.
The climax. Beijing 2008. The planet's biggest sporting stage. The entire world's eyes turned to China, where the grandeur of the opening ceremony had already made it clear this would be a different, historic Olympics. But no one imagined it would also be the scene of one of the greatest individual feats in sports history. Michael Phelps arrived in Beijing with a clear goal: 8 gold medals in a single Olympic Games. Something that seemed impossible, something that until then belonged only to imagination. Mark Spitz had won 7 in 1972, a record considered unreachable, but Phelps dared to dream higher. During those weeks, the world watched a superhuman spectacle. Phelps dove into the pool, and race after race broke records, defeated rivals, and silenced any doubt. The impossible became reality before the eyes of billions of viewers. They were dominant victories, but also moments of pure tension. The most emblematic happened in the 100-meter butterfly against Serbian Milorad Šavić. In the final stretch, it seemed like Phelps would lose the gold, but in one last desperate move, he stretched his arms and touched the pool wall just 1/100th of a second before his opponent. A blink of an eye, a breath, and victory was guaranteed. That race became a symbol of Phelps' spirit, the refusal to lose even when everything seemed decided. It was a proof that it wasn't just about talent or technique, but about a relentless mindset, an obsession with victory that made him unstoppable. By the end of the Games, the impossible had been achieved. 8 golds, Spitz's record surpassed, and Michael Phelps elevated to the status of living legend. The world spoke of no other name. He wasn't just a swimmer, he was the most dominant athlete who had ever stepped into an Olympics. The images from Beijing entered eternity. Phelps with arms raised, with the American flag on his back, crying with emotion while the anthem echoed in the water cube. A scene that even today gives millions of people around the world chills. But there was also an invisible weight in that triumph. Because the greater the glory, the greater the expectation, and the greater the achievement, the deeper the abyss when you fall. The world saw Phelps as superhuman, but behind the medals, there was just a man who would soon face his greatest demons. Have you ever lived a moment when you seemed to have achieved the impossible, but then had to deal with the weight of that achievement? Share in the comments, because Phelps' journey is about to dive into the darkest waters of his life. The fall and the shadows. 8 golds, the entire world at his feet.
Michael Phelps had done the impossible in Beijing 2008, but what no one saw was the unbearable weight of carrying the title of the greatest of all time. From the outside, he was superhuman. From the inside, a young man barely over 20, lost between glory and emptiness. What happens when you conquer everything before even turning 25? What's left to search for? The answer for Phelps was harsh. After Beijing came excesses, fame pressures, and the loneliness that accompanies those who live at the top. Compromising photos, parties, alcohol, personal problems. He was even suspended for inappropriate behavior. The hero's image began to crack. But the worst was yet to come. Behind the flashes and headlines, Michael was fighting a silent battle against depression. He would admit years later that he had thought about giving up everything, not his career, his life. It's hard to imagine the most decorated athlete in Olympic history, holder of unreachable records, feeling empty, without purpose, without ground beneath his feet. But that's the side few have the courage to show. Michael wasn't a machine. He was a human. And as a human, he faced his own demons. The pools which once were refuge now seemed like a burden. The boy who swam for passion found himself swimming only out of obligation. The superhero began to crumble before the world's eyes. And perhaps that was the most important moment of his life, because the fall revealed something greater than medals. It revealed the fragility of the human being behind the legend. At rock bottom, Phelps found the chance to start over. He sought help, opened his heart about his mental battles, and began rebuilding not just his career, but his own life. What about you? Have you ever been through a moment when there seemed to be no way out, but you found strength to start again? Write in the comments, because Michael Phelps' journey shows that even the greatest heroes can need help.
Redemption, Rio 2016. August 2016, Rio de Janeiro. The sun shone over the marvelous city, and the Olympics came to South America for the first time. For many athletes, it was a chance to live a dream. For Michael Phelps, it was much more than that. It was the chance to be reborn. After scandals, personal crises, and battles against depression, few believed he would have the strength to return to the top. He was already the greatest in history, already had all the medals anyone could dream of. So why come back? The answer was inside him. Phelps didn't want his story to end in shadows. He wanted one last dance, a worthy farewell, proof for himself and the world that there was still fire in his heart. When Phelps entered Rio's Olympic Aquatic Stadium, the crowd exploded in applause, and there, under the eyes of millions of Brazilians and billions of viewers on the planet, the legend shined again. It was 5 medals, 4 gold and 1 silver. And they weren't just achievements, they were symbols. Each gold, an answer. Each lap in the pool, a redemption. The most memorable moment happened in the 200-meter butterfly, his favorite event. 4 years earlier, in London, he had lost gold in that same distance. In Rio, he swam with fury, with determination, with the weight of revenge and the desire for redemption. He touched the wall first. Gold. Back on top. That wasn't just another title. It was man's victory over his own ghosts. And as if that weren't enough, the world witnessed the famous Phelps face, that cold, impenetrable look that went viral during the games.
There was the essence of the competitor, absolute focus, total concentration, as if nothing could divert him from his goal. In Rio, Michael wasn't just the greatest Olympic medalist in history. He was a transformed man, a champion who had fallen, faced darkness, and found strength to come back even stronger. The farewell was emotional. Phelps left the pool with tears in his eyes, carrying on his shoulders not just his medals, but also the most powerful message he could transmit. No matter how far you fall, it's always possible to get back up. If this scene gave you chills too, hit that like button and comment, what was Michael Phelps' most memorable moment for you? Immortal legacy. Looking back, Michael Phelps's journey seems straight out of a movie script. The restless kid from Baltimore, doubted at school, found in swimming pools not just a sport, but the path to eternity. He broke records, overcame barriers, faced his own demons, and in the end, rose as the greatest Olympic athlete in history. 28 Olympic medals, 23 of them gold, a feat that will hardly be surpassed. Every stroke, every dive, every hundredth of a second conquered built not just a resume, but a legend. Michael Phelps isn't just a name in books, he's the symbol of a generation. But his legacy goes beyond numbers. He showed the world that even the greatest champions are human, that behind glory there can be pain, insecurity, fragility, and that there's no problem in falling. What matters is having the courage to get back up. Today, far from competition, Phelps inspires millions by sharing his fight for mental health. He proves that being a champion isn't about hiding scars, but having the courage to show them. Because true greatness isn't just in shining medals, but in the honesty of recognizing that we all have invisible battles. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson from his story. You don't need to be perfect to be eternal. Michael Phelps is more than the greatest swimmer in history. He's the embodiment of what it means to have a champion's DNA. Fall, arise, fight, win, and above all, inspire. At Champions DNA, we celebrate stories like this. Stories of men and women who proved that glory isn't just about victories on the field, court, or pool. It's about courage, discipline, and faith in yourself.
And now, I want to hear from you. Is Michael Phelps the greatest Olympic athlete of all time? Leave your opinion in the comments and share this video with someone who needs inspiration. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because here you'll always find the DNA of history's greatest champions.